Motorsport has been on the brink of oblivion for the last few years thanks to the Vnuk insurance crisis. On Tuesday, a crucial EU vote went in favour of motorsport and means it can continue as it is in its current form. And it all started with a tractor and a man falling off a ladder. With me is Autosport's Group National Editor Jack Benyon. Now, you've been following this case since it began, really. So can you tell us what's it all about?
So we had a huge vote in the internal market committee in the EU this morning, which went in favour of motorsport, which is fantastic for the future of all the businesses, all the competitors, and really every level of motorsport. It's a really important vote, this one. It's not actually, everything's not over the line yet, but this was a really key vote for the future of insurance and motorsport. So to get this over the line was brilliant. And there's an MEP called Dan Dalton who's been working really hard on this, and he's been the man pushing this through in the European Parliament. So absolutely fantastic to actually get this vote over the line and see some progress for motorsport moving forward.
So a great outcome there, but how did this all come about? Where did Vnuk first start?
So Vnuk is actually the name of a gentleman called Benyon, who's Serbian, and was on a ladder and was knocked off of this ladder by a tractor that was reversing in a farmyard. And he took his case to the EU because he wanted damages for the fact that he'd been knocked off his ladder while he was working. To cut a long story short, what that exposed was that EU law was not being implemented properly by the countries within the EU. So we have something called a motor insurance directive, and what that does is it tells the countries how to make their laws for insurance. So it's not actually a law itself, but it gives them guidance. So if you want to make a law about insurance, you go to the Motor Insurance Directive, you read it, and you use that to make your law about insurance in your country. And what this Vnuk case did was expose the fact that that was being implemented incorrectly by all the countries in the EU.
So that court proceeding is completely understandable given the severity of that case. But what actual impact could that have had on motorsport, and particularly motorsport in the UK?
Well, the interpretation of this case was that every vehicle on private land needs to have insurance. So that can be something as small as a ride-on lawnmower. You know, we're talking about everything here: tractors, lawnmowers, anything that's on private land. And obviously, motorsport takes place on private land in most cases, on circuits all around the countries in the EU. So if a crash happened, for example, in a club race, then that would be treated as a road traffic collision. So the police could investigate, people could sue each other for damages. We could have this crazy situation where, two cars rubbing together on a track, which must happen, thousands, millions of times a year in motorsport. Every one of them could be investigated by the police, and we could have all sorts of paperwork involved and bureaucracy. It would just be crazy. And speaking to some of the insurance companies that are in the UK at the minute, a lot of them say they wouldn't be able to cover that. They just physically wouldn't be able to offer a package that would cover that kind of insurance. So what we were talking about here was the loss of motorsport overnight, and especially at that grassroots level where the money is just not there to fund insurance like that. And it just would have been a crazy situation where, like I said already, we've got cars crashing into each other, and the police could be involved.
So as you say, it could have spelled the end for motorsport. Were we close to that happening?
Very, very close. This interpretation, well, the case started in 2014, so it wasn't actually that long ago. But there's been campaigns happening for a long time now. We've had lots of different stages of the EU putting out different wordings involved in how they're going to word the new motor insurance directive. We've seen those issued. The first one we saw issued in November last year didn't have motorsport included in the wording, so motorsport had been completely left out. So at that point there was a worry that motorsport had been forgotten about, and in actual fact it was tactical and it was left out on purpose. But for people outside of EU directives, I mean, I'm no expert in EU legislation and I've had to become one overnight pretty much. It's a very complicated situation. We were really close. There was a lot of campaigning going on, and a lot of businesses really worried about this because it's not just the UK we're talking about here, we're talking about the whole of the EU, and that is where the majority of motorsport is based. We've got lots of factories in the UK and around the EU, lots of the world's best circuits, and this really could have caused a big problem.
Now, what areas of motorsport could this have impacted on? Would it have had an effect on like Formula 1 level, or going down to sort of Formula E, the single-seaters, and then grassroots motorsport? Where would it have been most felt?
I think it would have been most felt at the grassroots for sure. You like to think Formula 1, Formula E, the kind of championships that have some money and are backed by big manufacturers. It's very important for the sponsors to be seen as competing and things like that. I think they would have been able to find a way through, and they would have been able to find some insurance solution that would work for them. if we hadn't got the result we'd had today, which was obviously massively important, then I think the grassroots really would have struggled, because, as we mentioned before, there's no insurance company out there that would insure club motorsport, especially not the drivers who are crashing into each other on a regular basis and things like that. I mean, it's difficult enough with not having no claims bonus this year, these days, to get your car insurance on the road. So imagine how difficult it'd be if you're a club racer doing 12 rounds a year and crashing every week, 12 crashes a year. You'd never get any insurance. So I think the grassroots is really where this could have been felt really, really badly. And if we don't have the grassroots, then theoretically it's going to be much more difficult to get those drivers coming through to Formula One eventually. I'd like to think they would still make it in some way, shape or form, but it would be very difficult. So I think national motorsport was really in crisis here. I don't think we'll realise for a long time just how close we were to being in a serious crisis.
Now, an interesting thing, as you say, as you alluded to earlier, is that we're facing the Brexit situation in this country. So would the same rules have still applied to us even after we leave the EU, or whatever happens down the road there?
Yeah, there was an acceptance that this was going to affect us, whatever happened really, apart from if it was a hard Brexit. So if we get a hard Brexit, that would involve obviously the UK over time writing their own rules and deciding what their own rules were going to be. So it could have been anything at that point. We have no idea. Much like the outcome of Brexit, actually, we have no idea what's going to happen with the soft Brexit, or with staying in the single market. The outcome of this would have stayed the same. So if this vote would have failed, or if it would have succeeded, then it would have applied anyway. So Brexit was almost irrelevant in a way, because we have this crossing over period where we'll keep some of the EU laws for a certain period of time anyway. That's in a soft Brexit, and if we stay in the single market, so it was going to affect everything anyway. And there were some people saying, well, we're leaving in March, it doesn't matter, we don't need to worry about this after March. Really not the case, especially if we were staying in the single market, it would have applied. So Brexit was something that has hurt this campaign quite heavily, actually, because there's people who've turned around and said, well, like I would have said, we're leaving in March, and we don't need to worry about this, and it's actually not the case at all. And the other thing is, it's not been met with universal fear throughout Europe. Some countries have not taken this particularly seriously and not campaigned as hard as some of the others. So it's not quite been a united front for motorsport in the sense of trying to get this overturned. So it's been there's been plenty of ups and downs in the campaign, and a lot of misunderstanding as well, of not understanding what was happening and struggling to deal with things like the Motor Insurance Directive. Lots of big European bureaucracy words that people might necessarily have never heard of before. So it's been a real bitty campaign. But to finally get to this point now, I think myself, knowing some of the ins and outs of what's happened, probably quite closer than most people, knowing a lot of the detail about this bill and some of the amendments and all this kind of stuff that are going on, and really, like I said before, becoming a kind of European expert overnight, it's massive relief to see this happen today, knowing how close we've been to not getting this through. And that vote today was really a key part of saving motorsport for the future.
So are there any more steps and things still to go through, or is that the end of the chapter?
There's lots of complicated steps, and it's the EU, so it's not easy at all. The vote today was very important because it was done at committee level. Obviously, the Parliament, where the committee happens, they tend to go with what that committee says. Otherwise, there'd be no point in having the committee. It would be pointless in the first place. So we can assume that the Parliament are going to go with what the committee has suggested with this amendment, and motorsport will be safe. Fingers crossed. It could not happen, but very, very likely that it will. As I said, very unlikely that the Parliament would go against its own committee's decision. It'd be very unusual, and it would set quite a worrying precedent for the EU, I think. After that, it's voted on by MEPs. And then after that, the person who's responsible for looking after that bill will discuss it with all the EU governments to make sure that they're happy with the wording. And then theoretically, it should go ahead. The only thing that potentially could derail this now is we've got a really short time frame before the EU elections. So we need the law to be passed and finished before potentially we've got new MEPs coming in or going out. So we've got a short period of time now between now and the start of May when the elections start happening. So we really need this to push on quickly. And moving quickly is not something the EU's always used to. So I don't think it's anything to worry about, to be honest. I don't think it's something that's really going to stop this, or is anything particular to worry about. It's just a case of the legislation being pushed through, and there could be other things that take priority over, something like motorsport insurance in the EU. There might be something, much more higher up the agenda, if you like. But I think we're safe in the fact that we've got enough time before May that it will come off.